want to welcome everybody to the OCAP Speaking Series for this month. My name is John Clarke and I'm an organiser with OCAP. The format tonight is a little different in that we have a lot of people speaking, but with the municipal elections happening and with the attacks of the Doug Ford government intensifying, what we wanted to do was to try to bring together a range of organisations that are going to be very key to the fight back. And we'll still have time for about half an hour or so of questions and discussions afterwards. Just on some housekeeping stuff, childcare will be available from in about 10 minutes. And if anybody has any children they wish to take, they will be in the room just to the back of us, out in the hallway. Washrooms, if you haven't found them, are on the other side of the desk, out there behind me. And as was announced, you don't need to take plates out to the kitchen. There are bins at the back where you can leave the food. I also want to say that next month in November we will not be putting on a speaking series, but we'll be organising a bigger town hall meeting, and I'll have more to say about that at a different location. So before I introduce the first speaker, I also just wanted to, as we always do, point out that we are talking about fighting poverty and we're talking about fighting injustice in this city and beyond. And on that basis, we always acknowledge the first injustice, which is that the land that we are on was stolen from the indigenous peoples. And if we're going to be an organisation that fights against injustice, we must, of necessity, be an organisation that fights against colonialism. So, to introduce the first of our speakers is Edgar Godoy from the Ontario Health Coalition, and they will be organising a rally at the Ontario Legislature just upcoming.
Thank you so much for the introduction, John, and for the invitation from OCAP. Well, we're living difficult times in the province of Ontario. And before I start highlighting some of the preoccupations that we have as Ontario Health Coalition, for those who don't know what we do, the Ontario Health Coalition was created around 1980, and it was as a result of the creation of the universal healthcare program across the country in Canada. At that time, some visionary politicians put a healthcare system with an act and principles such as universal principles, accessibility, portability, and publicly administered system. We have been fighting for over 4 decades to defend public healthcare systems in Ontario and in the country as defined per the Healthcare Act in terms of the principles, in terms of equity and compassion that are some of the elements of that act. Healthcare is one of the equalizers in terms of the redistribution of income in Canada. However, the social programs, and not only social programs, healthcare in particular, but the welfare state has been dismantled brick by brick by brick. So what I mean by that is the neoliberal agenda has been in place for a long time, expressed in different ways in different provinces. And here in Ontario, we had over a decade or 12 years, 16 years of the Tories. Then we have another 16 years of the Liberals. And there are a little differences among themselves. But the reality is that they embrace the ideology of the 1%, of the rich, against the 99%. If we are to remember some of the key components of the struggle that an amazing movement brought to us a few years ago. So now we're faced again with that history of dismantling the province, a history of deceit and lies, because Mr. Ford was never given a mandate to privatize anything. Contrarily, he promised to end hallway medicine, which is what's been happening across the province. I don't know if you are aware, but many hospitals are functioning at 120%, 140%, and they don't have the capacity, they don't have the beds to cover the necessary services. And across the country, not only in Ontario, the healthcare system already have components that have been privatized. One of those big ones is the cost of drugs. So 1 out of 10 citizens in Canada cannot afford to pay for the medications. So we're talking more than 3.5 million people. But again, to put it in context, this is about class struggle. This is not new. This is a structural class struggle, pushing and taking away all the programs that people and rights people have won through serious struggle historically. Nothing has been given to us as citizens of this country free. People fought for labor rights. People fought for universal health care, for human rights. And as John said, people have been struggling against neo-colonialism and neocolonialism. And in order to change things around, we have seen in Latin America, the pink tide didn't go that far. So we need to go deep into the structural changes that change the current system, whatever you name it, capitalism, neoliberalism, austerity agenda, but we need to challenge that. And how we can challenge that? We can challenge that by coming together as we're doing here tonight. We can challenge that and change that by organizing ourselves, by raising awareness, by having a conversation about a strategy. How is it that we're going to get there? Because if we don't show the numbers, and we don't organize ourselves, and we don't embrace all the social progressive organizations, labor, community organizations, anti-poverty organizations, environmentalists, students movement, we won't be able to do that. We need to embrace everyone's struggles and come together. So as a way of motivating the people to start the struggle, we have called for a major rally on October 23rd, which is next Wednesday in Queen's Park. And a rally in itself is not a radical action, but it's a start. We need to start some point. Students already demonstrated to us across the province that actions can be taken. The $15 in fairness also did a mobilization a few days ago. So we can do that. And we did it during the Day of Actions. If you remember then, we got hundreds of thousands of people out. And we didn't win the social revolution, but we managed to push back the Harris agenda to the point that he started putting back monies in the 2 digits for healthcare and stop the major privatization of things that he was planning to do. So it is about coming together. It is about thinking about strategy. How do we do that? How can we embrace each other? That is all about here. But we need to be organized. We need a progressive agenda. We can call it, as we want to call it, a socialist agenda, people's agenda. So, but we want to be serious in terms of not taking for granted and being deceived by this vote for the lesser evil. And what is the alternative between the liberals and the Tories? You know what I mean? both at the provincial level and at the federal level. Those parties are parties, and I am afraid also with the NDP, are parties that embrace similar values and not the values of the majority, of the 99%, not the values of the working class, not the values of the poor. So I want to, on behalf of the Ontario Health Coalition, invite all of you to join us, those who can join us on Tuesday at Queen's Park at noon. We are expecting 100 buses from across the province. We aiming at 5,000 to 7,000 people. We have meetings with around 50 organizations in Toronto, including community organizations, healthcare workers, and labor to come together. So it is up to us to electrify this struggle and to start challenging the Ford government. He doesn't have a mandate to destroy the province, and we, the people, can stop up and call for progressive reforms that bring democracy back and put the powers in the hands of the working class. Thank you.
Thanks. Next, we're going to hear from Andrew Peters from No One Is Illegal. And if there is one thing that is absolutely important in the struggle against Doug Ford and the agenda that we're confronting, it's unity, and it's unity against racism. And there will shortly be an attempt to bring in white supremacists, Steve Bannon and David Frum, to speak here in the city, and that needs to be challenged, and it needs to be challenged decisively. And No One Is Illegal is involved in that.
Thanks, John. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks to OCAP for having us all here. First of all, for those of you who don't know what No One Is Illegal does, we are an organization. Thanks. We're an organization that fights for the freedom of migrants and everybody to move, to stay, and to return to wherever they go and wherever they want to remain. And a part of that work, we also work for the access for everybody to services, access for all, and the freedom to access. And we also, in this struggle, fight white supremacy and xenophobia wherever we see it. So it's a scary time in Toronto. I'm sure for a lot of you it is as well. It's a scary time for me, and it's a scary time for all of us. And particularly for three reasons that I see in front of us. First of all, we have Doug Ford at Queen's Park, who is pushing an austerity agenda in all directions at once. We've seen attacks on housing and essential services in the city, like public health and shelters. We see the stalling of critical safe injection sites in the city, and the villainization of immigrants, refugees, and the poor, especially. And also, who here has heard of Faith Goldie? Yeah, scary, right? So at Toronto City Hall right now, we have a known and self-identified white supremacist running for mayor. Faith Goldie is running for mayor while on the weekends going out to gatherings of neo-Nazis in the streets, our streets. So, and now, on November 2nd, at Roy Thompson Hall, Steve Bannon has been invited to debate David Frum. Does everyone know who Steve Bannon is? Yeah, he is the architect of the Muslim ban, of the caging and separation of migrant children from their families, and the creator of Breitbart News, a internet blog that is a peddling of hatred and lies and violence in the States. And it's ridiculous. And Bannon is being brought to debate David Frum, who is the person who's supposed to be the non-evil side of this joke of a debate. But David Frum was the chief propagandist of George W. Bush. He designed the Iraq invasion, killed millions, displaced hundreds of thousands in the Middle East. He is a war criminal, period. And simple. So the fact that he's now seen as opposite to Bannon is ridiculous. It's a terrifying joke. And you know what's terrifying about it? Is that all of these evil people, these war criminals, these white supremacists, these neo-Nazis, the Doug Fords, the Faith Goldies, the Stephen Bannons, and the David Frums are being given microphones and platforms to preach their hatred in our city. And we're just treating this like an idea to be entertained, like it's a valid thing that we should allow in our city and on our streets. So alongside a coalition of 10 other community organizations and growing, who are fighting for the rights of all of us, from housing to workers' rights to migrant and refugee organizers, anti-poverty advocates, and pro-democracy campaigners, no one is illegal Toronto is saying that we've had enough of all of this. Because the longer we allow the politics of racism, of white supremacy, and of violence to become normalized, the more these austerity-seeking politicians are given the justification to strip us of our social services, to greenlight the villainization of the poor and the oppressed, and to pick us off community by community in the city. This is what happens when we treat reactionary right-wing hatred and bigotry as racism, as mainstream. This is the danger of giving these men a platform and making the political ideologies that for generations and generations have ripped apart our communities to just seem casual and okay. These politics have started wars across the world again and again, and we have a chance to stop them here in Toronto. So, did anyone here know that Steve Bannon's stop here in Toronto is actually part of this crazy, huge, messed up fascist world tour? What he's doing is he's traveling around the world trying to drum up support for his particular brand of hatred. And what that looks like is he was just in France hanging out with Marine Le Pen. He's meeting with right-wing extremist politicians in Europe and elsewhere. He's holding talks and gathering white supremacists in the streets to build a foundation that he's calling the movement. The plan for his foundation is to provide funding for these fascist terrorists to run for office all over the world, just like they have been here. He wants to elect more Doug Fords. He wants to elect people like Faith Goldie and Donald Trump across the entire world. This is what's at stake. This is what they stand to win if we lose. So now more than ever is the time for us to build, maintain, and nurture the kind of relationships and coalitions that have the power to fight these people. Now is the time for our communities to come together and unite behind common ideas and truly reinforce all of our needs and goals. And that's why we're here today. That's why we're hearing from six of us on this panel. Because we know that under right-wing extremists like them, austerity might be the least of our worries when people are being openly attacked by the government and by the foot soldiers of these white supremacists that they lend power and legitimacy to. And this is the scariest thought of all. So we need to publicly confront people like Bannon. We need to send a clear message that shows the ways in which we will not tolerate their presence, and we will not allow their platforms to exist in these streets, in our streets. People like the Fords, the Bannons, and the Frums, they want to tell you that migrants, immigrants, poor local communities, and racialized people are the enemy, and that they're enemies of each other. This is why the outright lie that migrants and refugees are taking over shelters and services has been so widespread. And it's related to the same lie that the increased minimum wage will make Toronto poorer. We know that's not true. And making people angry about these completely ridiculously fake facts allow them to pay us less. They allow them to at the same time remove services that we all use, all of us here. We all need these services. It's in their interest to pit us against each other and to split our struggles up. They know that if we organize together, we would be unstoppable. So here's some things you can do, and that you can join us and other groups who are already doing work like this. One, in the short term, you could come out to our rally on November 2nd at 5 p.m. at Roy Thompson Hall, where we're going to try to stop Bannon and shut down the muck debates. We're over 10 organizations strong, and we're growing, and we'll be holding a mass demo to tell racist, fascist, xenophobes like Bannon and Frum that they're not welcome in our city. There'll be art and music, and you'll have the chance to meet others who are sick of these right-wing hate peddlers. And if you want to help in the lead up to this, we're also having an art build on Sunday the 28th at 10 a.m. at the Workers' Action Center. A second thing you can do is that when you hear those lies, you have to confront them on the street. Confront those lies from Doug Ford and Donald Trump and Faith Goldie and Steve Bannon whenever you hear them and wherever you hear them. And in doing that, defend your friends and defend the community that you live in against their violent foot soldiers on the streets. And third, show up to do the work of organizing and show up to join these organizations, like a lot of you are doing here today. Join the collectives whose liberation is tied with yours. So, because raising low wages, getting access to services like healthcare and housing, and protecting each other against racist and classist attacks against refugees, immigrants, migrants, and all marginalized people builds power in our communities. And that power is the power that will resist austerity and fascist governments that are trying to steamroll over the people. Thank you.
Yeah, and next introduce M. Carl, and they represent the Toronto Overdose Prevention Society. And I must just say that when we talk about this issue, in some ways, if we can allow a government to stigmatise and abandon people and let them die, then how are we going to organise any movement of resistance? So really welcome this speaker.
Thank you so much. So I'm actually a frontline worker at the Moss Park Overdose Prevention site. So I'm representing TOPS right now, but a lot of the organization work has been done by a lot of other people. It's been kind of a rotating cast. We've been really lucky because as some people have life events that come up and they have to step down, other people are able to step forward. So it's nice in that it's like decentralized and very grassroots. So this might have been the same PowerPoint that was shown last time. I'm gonna go through it kind of quickly, more or less just to give some background on the opioid crisis. And then I'd just like to chat about some of the other actions that have been planned and executed over the last little while and some things that are coming up actually this weekend. So if you can just skip to the next slide. So for many years, like 5, 6, maybe more years, there were supervised injection sites that had been in the works and were basically in a stasis. There was no forward movement in terms of actually getting them opened. Can you get it to scoot down a little bit, just so we can see? We love the first photo, but...
Sorry.
And that's okay. This is going to be very organic. We're going to, allow for some, we're just going to take it as it comes. But they weren't being opened, and as it says in the slide there, the drug supply was becoming increasingly toxic, and street heroin, is incredibly rare these days. It's basically all fentanyl. Like when people come into my work and I'm writing down their stats for the day and they say they've got heroin, I'm like, wow, where'd you find that? You barely see it anymore. And so you can scoot down some more too. So here's, you probably can't see it very well, but you can see the increase in deaths here. Next slide. Oh, yeah, awesome. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so this is a really scary stat. So overdose deaths have surpassed motor vehicle accidents as a leading cause of death in Ontario for 5 years. Yeah, let's keep going.
Okay.
So by the summer of 2017, frontline workers were just like, we just basically can't sit by anymore and let this happen. And in September of 2016 in Vancouver, Sarah Blythe and her crew were the ones who had gotten tents, chairs, tables, and set up an overdose prevention site. So we saw that model and we're like, let's do the same thing. Yeah, let's keep going. To us, since there were so many major media outlets present. So yeah, and then Ottawa opened theirs on August 25th. So it was really, we can keep going. There's some lovely pictures. Oh no, so here you can just see, this is a heat map of 911 calls for overdoses. And you can see right there, that blurred, that's Moss Park. So thankfully on that first day, the police did express their support. Well, it was somewhat hesitant, they couldn't seem too jazzed about it, but they were despite the fact that people will be using illicit drugs, no, we're going to allow this to proceed. Likely because they do get called to the sites of overdoses. They're often the last to show up and the least helpful because by then paramedics and firefighters have already either resuscitated the person or like taken their vital stats and basically police just show up and intimidate people. And sometimes they do follow people to hospital and try to question them further there if the person agrees to go to the hospital. So it's like completely unnecessary. And if you are one of the people who's making a 911 call, you can just say that the person's not responsive, non-breathing. You don't necessarily have to say it's an overdose. And police shouldn't show up. I've actually managed to get them not to show up once, which was great. So yeah, keep going. Keep going, more stats. I don't really want to make this a numbers game. I want to get to talking more about the organizational end of things. So here's what our tents look like. Thankfully, it was still like the tail end of summer, so yeah, we can keep going. This is our distribution tent. This was largely where I was hanging out. So we had harm reduction kits, hygiene supplies, safer sex supplies, like whatever. Everything was by donation. On August 3rd, 2017, that's when we started. That's when we started the GoFundMe. So that's like everything was by donation. A lot of the food that you see, people would just like stop by and drop it off. It was really sweet. We had a really amazing Thanksgiving dinner last year in the park, and we actually had a really nice one this year too, but it was inside, so a little bit different. Here's our injection tent. So I was recently in Thunder Bay for a harm reduction conference, and they were asking me, where did you get the oxygen tanks? And I texted someone and asked, and they were like, they came off the truck, meaning they were taken from the community health center and the managers didn't need to know. So these are the kinds of measures that you need to take in order to make something like this happen. So there's the tables where people can hang out and inject. Supplies, we have like areas for in case somebody does overdose. There were mats on the ground so we could try to, catch their fall if they were to fall. And then also if someone just needed to rest for a bit, they could hang out there. So yeah, we can keep going. Our favorite, the police. And you can see in the top right hand corner, we're just doing like some setup takedown. We have to do that every day. Setup takedown. At first we were renting a van, storing everything in there, but then eventually we got storage lockers in the park. We keep going. And yeah, here's our flyer, kind of showing people where we were. Keep going. Yeah, who is involved? So people who use drugs, actually, on the first day, we had a community member who was completely surprised at what we were, like he couldn't believe it. He was like, really, you're setting up a tent where people can come and do drugs, and you're gonna make sure we're safe. And then he kept showing up every day, and kept coming back every day. And then now he's actually an employee at the indoor site, so it was also really lovely because community members were so valued for their experiences that we could then eventually like employ and pay them. Other people who had, might not be drug users themselves, but who had already responded to overdose. And then we did have nurses, nurse practitioners, doctors. Let's see. Yeah, police generally cooperating. I mean, they still like to go by on their bikes. And sometimes hang out, and we have to go over and tell them like people aren't using the site, which means they're going to use somewhere else and potentially die. Can you please not like park your car in the parking lot adjacent to here so people will feel safe enough to show up? No explicit municipal court. So my first day was August 29th, 2017, so I like hopped on a little bit later on. My first day was also the first time that John Tory showed up. So initially he was saying, here's Kathleen Wynn, yay. Initially he was like, these sites need to be shut down as soon as safe injection sites get set up, because an overdose prevention site is meant to be a temporary measure. That's why it's only funded for 6 months. But the great thing about them is that they're much lower barrier, like less paperwork when you're doing intake. And just for a variety of reasons are like a little, for some people they prefer them, they can be easier to access. So he ended up showing up. I remember I was in the distribution tent and one of our community members was showing him how to cook drugs in a spoon, and he kind of had this look on his face. And then one of our other community members injected in front of him into her jugular, and he was like overcome and like, hugged her after, and then a few days later, when speaking to the press, he talked about how the site was necessary, and yes, it should continue to exist even after the safe injection sites are open. Okay, I feel like I've covered like a good amount of the beginning. Let's forget the slides for now. So, oh yeah, here's our tents after having the crap kicked out of them by the wind. And eventually, they sent us this EMATS tent, which was unusable and sat there. They paid security guards to monitor it 24 hours a day. Can you imagine what else they could have done with that money? And then eventually, QP donated us a trailer. Yeah. So, okay, I'm gonna say, let's just stop with the slides for now. So, let me see, quickly, numbers. So, I'll just tell you guys, so we operated from August 12th of 2017 until late June, and then we were able to open our indoor site. And the model that we created from having this OPS in Moss Park eventually led to, that was the model that was utilized to create the other overdose prevention sites in different cities and the ones that eventually opened up in Toronto. So since we've been indoors, let's see, from July 3rd till the end of September, we've had 2,727 injections. We've had 29 overdoses and only 4 that needed naloxone. One of the nice things that we've learned is that you can basically like ferry people through an overdose with oxygen alone. You don't have to, you don't necessarily have to give them naloxone. It's a different story if you're just at home. It was originally actually THRA, or the Toronto Harm Reduction Alliance, who set up in the park. But then TOPS the Toronto Overdose Prevention Society was generated from there. And in terms of recent actions, unfortunately we don't have like a vigil or march coming up. So I'm sure some of you may have seen in the press, we did have the vigil on October 1st in Queen's Park, where 1,265 crosses were erected to signify the deaths by overdose, which occurred in 2017. And then just on Monday, we had another vigil and a banner drop where people marched from Regent Park, CHC, to Street Health, to Moss Park. One event that's upcoming, well, there's 2 actually, is something that's called Change My Mind. Have any of you seen the meme where it's like the smug guy sitting at the table holding a mug and there's a banner in front of him that says Change My Mind? Originally it said male privilege doesn't exist, change my mind, but then people are changing it to things like Pop-Tarts or ravioli, change my mind, or Garfield is enemy, change my mind. So then people have been tabling with overdose prevention sites or a vital service, change my mind, and setting up. So on Friday they're going to be in Yonge and Dundas Square from 1 to 3. And then on Saturday, they're going to be near Humber College from 12 to 2. So this was actually an idea that came up at a THRA meeting, just because we were looking for like different ways to connect with the public, because in as much as we need to appeal to politicians, sometimes it's falling on deaf ears, considering Doug Ford said he was dead against overdose prevention sites. Fantastic choice of words. And we've also had a wheat pasting campaign that's been going along with that. So, and all of that actually came up from a meeting that was had in my blanket fort, where a few people who realized that many of the folks who normally do the organizing for actions related to overdose were burnt out, very busy with the Parkdale Overdose Prevention Site, otherwise unavailable. So there's a few folks who none of us had actually organized a protest before got together, and from that we have the Change My Mind action and the sweet pasting campaign. So from my end, I would just like to say, if you've never done any kind of organizing, don't be afraid to take the reins and do it, because it's pretty fun and empowering. And that you know, doing this kind of work doesn't always just happen to be the same people all the time. Like, don't be afraid to step up and do it, because you don't know what can come from it, such as overdose prevention sites all across Ontario. I think I've talked enough. Thanks everyone for listening, and I didn't get a chance to bring anything with me in terms of like naloxone kits or any handouts or anything. If you want to come visit us, we're at 134 Sherbourne Street, and you can come visit between 11 to noon or from 6 to 7, Tuesday through Sunday. Maybe I'll like try to find a place to write it down, just so you can have a little tour while we're not actually open, since it is a private healthcare facility. But we'd really love for you to come by, see our space, and you know what can come of setting up some tents in a park, and get trained on naloxone. So yeah, thank you.
And an announcement comes on, and they call you customer, and that always drives me insane, because I don't want to be a customer on the TTC. I want to be using a public service, and I want to defend that public service, and I want that service to be expanded, and I don't want it to be privatised. I don't want it to be handed over to private businesses. So our next speaker, Anna Lermer from the TTC Riders, is going to speak to just that thing.
Hi, thanks so much for having me here. I'm so happy to be included in this conversation that's happening. That's so important. So I'm going to cover a couple of different things. We're working on a lot of things always, because there's always a lot of transit issues. But I'll talk a little bit about how austerity over the past couple of decades has affected transit, who we are as TTC riders, what we're working on, and how you can get involved in what we're doing right now. Oh, sorry, you skipped a couple. Oh. I'll go back to the second one, sorry. The first thing I want to do is just ask people if they took the TTC to get here today, or if they took the TTC to get somewhere today, just by a show of hands. Awesome. That's a lot. So we all use the TTC as an essential service to get ourselves around the city, to connect us with culture and community, jobs, medical appointments, family. You know, it's a vital service, and it should remain public. And when you pay a fare to get on the TTC, you might be paying $3 or $3.25. And if you could go to the next slide. I don't know if anybody knew this, but the government is paying $1.07. So, you know, we pay 70% of this public service to use it. And out of context, that might seem normal, but in reality, it's one of the lowest funded transit agencies across North America. So Toronto is, by this graph, this is from 2017, is the lowest funded transit agency in North America. And that's pretty bad, and that's a big reason why our service is so bad today. Next slide. Yeah, and so all of this has occurred. We pay so much for our transit system and get quite, little in return, pretty bad service, because of things that happened with the last PC government. So Mike Harris, when his first order of business when he took office was to cut the province's contribution to capital costs, capital funding for transit expansion in municipalities. And in 1998, he cut the 50% operating subsidy that the province contributed. So that was like overnight, our transit service went from being quite well funded to basically not funded at all. And the burden fell on the city to pay for service. And we've seen a massive deterioration in our TTC service since that happened. And transit doesn't go where we need it. We have really long waits. You have overcrowded buses and subways, major overcrowding, physical inaccessibility. Accessibility is an afterthought in our system, and we don't have the funds dedicated to improve that. And we also have really expensive fares and the threat of privatization. A lot of our new transit lines being built are semi-privatized through P3s and a lot of other things, and that's a huge threat to our public system. And I'll explain a bit more about that after. So if you go to the next slide. One of the major impacts that this cut in funding has had is that we have to, as customers, have to pay for the service instead of it being subsidized. So our TTC fares have actually increased twice as fast as inflation since 2006. And that's, way above the rate of property tax increases and the rate of business property tax increases. So rather than the city deciding, okay, we're gonna raise some more money because our funding got cut and pay that way, they're increasing our fares and making us pay way more for the service. And that's where TTC Riders comes in. So we were founded in 2012, and we're a transit advocacy organization that is made up of transit riders, frustrated transit riders, advocating for better service, more affordable service, and more accessible service. And we do this in a number of different ways. We generally target the province and the city because at the end of the day, it's about funding. We are living in an age of austerity, and the only way for our transit system to work is if it's funded. So we are constantly fighting for more funding to stop service cuts and for better service for everybody. And so just some examples of some of the things we do to visualize frustrated transit riders and the stories of transit riders. Our group is made up of lots and lots of transit riders across the city, and we try to, through our actions in pressuring politicians to change, their minds about budget decisions and to raise awareness about this issue amongst the public in Toronto. We do these kind of fun actions every once in a while. Yeah, and so now I'll talk about what's happening right now. So at the provincial level, the PC government is threatening to take our subway system away. And it's a little bit of a complicated mess. There's a lot of different ways that it could happen. But we know that Metrolinx, who would then take ownership of this subway, this public asset, would privatize. They have plans to privatize, they have plans to increase fares, charge you a fare by distance or by speed, so folks who earn less will be relegated to slower service, bus lanes, overcrowded, transit lines. So we know that this isn't a good thing, and so we're fighting really hard against it. And we've found a ally in the Amalgamated Transit Union, who is the union that represents all the TTC workers, and so we're fighting with them against this because we know that this is one of the biggest threats to our system, privatization, and then the deterioration of our services and the cutting of really essential services for underserved neighborhoods. The second thing that's happening at the provincial level right now is that a thing called the gas tax may be cut by the PC government. That was one of their promises. And so we know that they've also promised that they're going to keep the funding to our transit system from the portion that's not cut, but we don't really trust them at all. And we need that funding. We need all the funding that we can get in order to serve Toronto. So we are also fighting against that, and we've actually allied with groups across Ontario to do just that. We're going to be doing an open letter and petition actions. And one thing that we're doing at the provincial level, which is kind of a new strategy, is focusing on areas in the GTA where PC MPPs won with a small margin of votes. So their seats are they're not very secure. And so we're going to be specifically trying to build support in those areas. And we know that it's really important to build power in order to make change. And so we're focusing on those areas, mostly Scarborough and Etobicoke. And it's actually where service is the worst, and we have the least kind of people in our organization, members in our organization so far. So we're focusing on that, and that's a bit of a shift in strategy because of the current government. And the other level of issues that we work on is the city. So we need funding. We need more funding always from the province. But we also recognize that the city makes all the decisions about where that funding goes, where money gets spent on this service, on that service, on this fare, on this pass. So there are a lot of issues that we're fighting. I'm going to focus on the first two, but I just wanted to include all of them. So we are expecting fare hikes next year. That's been in the budget. And so we say no to that. We don't want to see our fares rise. We've already seen on the graph I showed earlier that fares are going up way faster than they should be. And we're paying more than our fair share to fund this service. And so we want to say no to those. And we're going to be holding a rally probably early January. And would love for everybody to come to that. We don't have a date set, but when we do, we'll share it. Would love everyone to come to that because we really, our service is already bad and we pay a lot and we want to make sure that at least we maintain the status quo if nothing else. And then, on top of that, we're going to fight for better service. We're also fighting for fare pass funding, which I'll talk a bit about after. Things around the Presto and the token phase out and making sure that it's accessible and fair. And then we're always tackling overcrowding and unreliable service. And we want to expand rapid transit to underserved neighborhoods as well. So we're working with lots of different groups on all of these different issues to make that happen. So I'm going to move on to something that I feel is very relevant and we're working on right now, which is the Fare Pass. So it's a low-income pass that we've been working with a group called the Fare Coalition for quite a while, and we have had some wins that I would like to share with you, and then we're also demanding for more things. But I just want to draw your attention, if you can see, you probably can't see this from back there, but the cost of a Metro Pass, when you look at how much someone on OW or ODSP earns, is outrageous and puts people in the negative when you think about housing and food costs as well. And so the Fare Pass, which we advocated for, is meant to reduce that burden so people can take transit and connect to their communities, as we know people need to do, without going into debt and not being able to buy food or, not being able to pay their rent. That's really big.
Yeah. Sorry. I glued up the last one.
Oh, okay, thanks. And the Fare Coalition is a group of TTC riders, other social justice groups, and a lot of service agencies who are delivering services to folks who need this Fare Pass. And so we're advocating with them to roll out the second and third phases of the Fare Pass. The first one is for OW and ODSP recipients. The second phase is for folks who receive a housing and childcare subsidy. And the third phase is anyone who's low income based on kind of their cutoff. And so those two phases haven't been funded yet, and they're not in the budget to be funded. And so we need to work really hard to make sure they're funded. But in addition, we know that that's not enough. So it's $2 per fare instead of $3, and $115 for a Metro Pass instead of $145. And so we're advocating for free transit for anyone on social assistance because we know that people can't afford it and they need it. And we're also advocating that transit is free for everybody on extreme weather alert days because it is a public safety issue. It's a health issue, and it's something that we can do with our public asset to help people really concretely. And the third piece is way deeper discounts for folks who are on low income. So that's $1 per fare that we're advocating for, and a $50 Metro Pass. Because, although it's not free yet, it is more accessible for sure and more affordable. The final thing that we're working on with this Fare Coalition is accessibility of the token Presto after the token phase out. So we know this is like an issue that's really, really key and going to affect a lot of people. And so we're demanding a meeting with Metrolinx to talk to them. We've met them once before to find out what their plans are. And so we're working on that, and we would love for other folks to get involved, making sure that the new Presto ticket or whatever replaces tokens is still accessible and service agencies can still buy in bulk and give out to folks. And one little piece that kind of just to make sure that folks can access these services, one of the things that TTC Riders does is, we advocate for change. And once we get some change that will make people's lives a little bit easier, transit a little bit more accessible, we want to make sure people are taking advantage of that. So we know a lot of folks aren't using the fare pass that has been put in place. And so if you are an OW or ODSP recipient with less than $100 going towards transit as a subsidy, you can fill out an application form. We also have a survey that we have online, as well as I have some hard copies as well. If you want to share your experience of using the fare pass, if you have signed up for it, and we're going to use that to advocate to improve the program in this coming year. And then we also run fare pass clinics to make sure everyone knows about this. So you can let us know if you want one for your community or service organization, and we'll come and go through the application process with you and give you some tips. And I have all that info printed out up here, so if you would like to see any of it, and you would like an application form or the survey, you can come let me know at the end, and I'll pass them out to you. And all of this work, the theme of all of the work that we're doing is that, we know our public transit system is really important in connecting all of us. It should work for all of us, and it needs to be fairly funded by our governments. And so we invite you to join the work that we're doing. We have a monthly meeting to organize our actions, to discuss what campaigns we want to run and what issues we need to be tackling to make sure that our transit system's improving. And that's on Monday, November 5th at 5:30. We always have pizza or something else to eat. And then the second piece is the Fair Coalition is having a meeting next Wednesday at 4. And if you want to join the Fair Coalition or just check out what they're about, if you think your organization might be interested in joining us in this fight for more affordable fares, you can come. It's an open public meeting. And that's it. Thank you so much.
And Anna Willats is going to speak for RadTO. Going to speak about the kind of city that we want to live in and we demand to live in, regardless of who wins the next election.
Hey everyone, how are you doing? Do you need to stretch a little bit or anything? Feel free, to wiggle around a little bit. Thanks very much for your patience, for listening to these amazing activists and organizers. I am not, RadTO is a new group. It was established last year. It's a small group with a large mailing list. It's made up of about a dozen folks like myself who have been working to organize around a whole bunch of different issues for many years. Union folks, academics, people who are allies to groups like OCAP, doing gender violence issues and the elementary teachers and others. And we had started meeting last year because we wanted to figure out ways to support the amazing work that the folks who are up here at the table with me have been doing. There are so many grassroots, underfunded or unfunded organizations in this city that are really leading the fight back against austerity, the fight for accessible transit, the fight for proper responses to the opioid crisis, the overdose crisis, and other emergencies, and in the fight against racism and xenophobia. And we all were talked about how we could support those efforts without causing more work for all these hardworking people. And we thought, so we organized a series of meetings over the last year, bringing organizers together to talk about what kind of city do we want to be fighting for. What are the things that we want to propose? We were kind of organizing with an eye to the municipal election. You've all heard there's an election coming up on Monday. You know that, of course, Doug Ford came along in the summertime and threw a bomb into the middle of our election and totally changed the direction of it. And that we're looking at in this city having fewer councillors and poorer representation for the residents of Toronto. and that we're looking at an election that's going to result in people elected who are going to be totally unable to carry out an agenda of progress for the people of Toronto. So RadTO brought people together over the last year, and we've developed a platform. And Mark has the website for RadTO up here. It's called citywefightfor.org. And we've developed a platform based on the input of all the people that we've been meeting with over the last year. We have a large mailing list of folks who have come to these meetings. We held a big public forum in March that we called a People's Assembly, where we heard from folks like Toronto Overdose Prevention Society, the Jane Finch Action Against Poverty group, which just celebrated their 10th anniversary and has been a big part of our group since its inception, Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, and others. And at that People's Assembly, people talked about the fact that they did want to bring a progressive platform. They wanted to bring progressive ideas to the election, and they wanted to see something bold. And some really bold ideas and radical ideas brought forward. So that's what we've been trying to do, and we've developed this platform, and I'll just go through it. It's we're hoping that it's accessible to people, that it's really focused on what we want to fight for, more than what we want to fight against, but of course those two things usually go together. We are modeling ourselves on other very successful coalitions over the past number of years. People here maybe were involved in the Stop the Cuts coalition during Rob Ford's time. Anybody here? Other folks were involved in fighting back against Harris in a coalition called the Embarrass Harris Coalition. And there have been many, many other collective efforts. And that's what we're really trying to support, is a collective effort, because the amazing work that the groups that you're hearing from tonight and many, many other groups around the city are doing is really important, but it needs to be supportive, and we need to bring the issues together so that we're fighting together to make sure that we have a city that works for people. And what we know from the election, and I'm sure John will talk about this a bit too, what we know is whether we get, Josh Cole or Joe Mihevik, whether we get George Smitherman or Kristen Wong-Tam, whether we get Mamaliti or Peruzza, whether we get Tory or Keesmaat, what we're really going to have is probably the same kinds of ideas, some a little more forward thinking than others, but basically people working from the kind of the same roadmap. And whether we tweak the property tax, like we don't raise it, or we raise it by 0.5%, that is not really going to be a bold way where we're going to get some change in this city, where we're going to get a city that really works for people. And RadTO, so I'll go through our platform in a second. You can go onto our website. I apologize, it's the only way to really sign the platform or endorse it, is to go onto the website, read it, add your name. We are approaching candidates, municipal candidates, to endorse. We are not endorsing candidates per se, but if candidates sign on to this platform, we will certainly let people know about that. Chiara Padovani, who's running against Francis Nunziata, for example, has endorsed this platform. We're hoping to have Saron Gebrselassie endorse this platform. And we really want to support people who are thinking creatively, thinking very, very progressively, and really tied to the grassroots, tied to the residents of Toronto, and really reflecting what the residents of Toronto need. So we also know that with 25, no matter what the results of the election, we're going to have 25 people, as I say, who are not going to be able to represent, they're not very good at representing the interests and the needs of residents as it is. Cutting that in half is going to make that even harder. And this does present an opportunity, I think, for us to be working very hard in our neighborhoods and in our communities to be taking the demands of the residents of Toronto forward. And if we leave it up to City Council to appoint neighborhood councils that they elect, we're going to end up with things like business improvement associations, we're going to end up with residents associations, we're going to end up with things like community police liaison committees, and we know we have those already, and those are not the kinds of structures that take bold ideas forward, that really look for transformational change. So I think that we need to be proactive, and we need to be on top of that, and we need to bring forward proposals that will find ways to really bring the needs and the ideas of residents forward. The platform that we have created has 6 planks to it. And I'm not sure if you can get it up there, Mark, but I'll just read it off for you. The first point is to house the city. We deserve homes to live. This means more rent geared to income municipal housing and repaired and dignified Toronto community housing. We deserve enough shelter beds and rent controls. We deserve a new definition of affordable housing that is income-based. The second plank is to connect the city. We deserve free, expanded, public, fully accessible, rapid, environmentally sustainable transit. Our communities deserve digital access. We must integrate elders, people with diverse abilities, and those of us living alone in the city and to each other. We need to green the city. We deserve a fully funded climate strategy that works. We deserve expanded and safe bike lanes and a flood relief plan. We need community benefits agreements which prioritize local employment and community needs. We deserve access to healthy foods and access to growing our food. We call for a transformation of the city. We must decolonize the city and its institutions. We deserve gender equity budgeting. We need cuts to the police budget and those funds reallocated to community support systems. We need a solidarity city with access to services for undocumented residents through municipal ID cards. We deserve participatory budgeting in elected neighborhood councils. We deserve an effective emergency response to the overdose crisis. We need to build the city. We deserve free, expanded, universal, and diverse cultural, recreational, and educational programming. We deserve affordable childcare. We need to fix our schools and turn those schools into community hubs after hours. We need commercial rent control, incentives for small business, and an end to privatization. We deserve a $15 minimum wage now, which increases tied to the cost of living. And we need to fund the city. We need to generate new funds and prioritize community transformation. This means a municipal mansion tax, municipal property tax tied to the cost of living increase, stormwater fees, development charges, vehicle registration fees for luxury vehicles, and progressive revenue streams. We need to cut the police budget, and we're suggesting starting at 20%. These changes will generate the resources needed to build the city we deserve. This platform on another page is described in more detail. This platform is not comprehensive. Every day I think of different things that could be added to this, like people with allowing permanent residents to vote. Ranked ballot initiative, which they're trying out in London on Monday for the first time in Canada, I believe, where people get to make their top 3 choices for mayor and council, etc. And I'm sure you have lots of ideas about other things that needed to be added to this platform. So we're quite clear that this platform, while it's directed at the election, and we're hoping that people will be talking about these ideas with candidates and that candidates will consider them, really the work begins after the election. And so what we're going to do after the election is we're going to call for a People's Assembly in November. We're going to make sure it doesn't cross over with the date that OCAP has got called, is going to call. But we want to call for a People's Assembly. We want to bring people together again to talk about this platform, to talk about how we can make councillors accountable and the mayor, whoever it is, accountable to this platform, and how we can push and press for these things to be implemented over the next 4 years. And we also want to organize a rally for December 4th, and the details will be coming soon. December 4th is the first day that the City Council will be sitting and meeting, and so we'll be calling for a rally that day down at City Hall. And if you go keep track of our website, citywefightfor.org, you'll find more and more details about all of those actions. Thanks very much.
So I'm going to wrap up for OCAP. Now, when Doug Ford was elected a few months ago, you may have noticed that he coined the term government for the people. And he always says it with that horrible smile that he has. And he brings in this notion that he somehow represents ordinary people. It's his sort of thing. But nothing could possibly be further from the truth. What the Ford government is doing on behalf of millionaires and billionaires is preparing and beginning to cut the social infrastructure of this province and engage on a war on the poor and engage in a veritable class war against working class people throughout the province of Ontario. And he has worked it out so that the Ontario or the Toronto level of government will be as submissive as possible in terms of implementing that agenda of austerity. And if there is one thing about the austerity agenda of Doug Ford, one objective, it is to make sure that labour is as cheap as possible. They want to create a low-wage economy, and they want people to scramble for the worst possible jobs. And they're going after that on a couple of key fronts. One is, of course, they've attacked the gains that were made around the minimum wage and workers' rights. They want to drive down the adequacy of the minimum wage, and they want to ensure that people who work on the employer's terms and have as few rights as possible. And as well as that, they are looking to refine the attack on poor people through the social assistance system, through Ontario Works and through ODSP. They cancelled the meagre 3% increase in social assistance rates and a whole series of other measures that were going to make people's lives somewhat better. And they announced that they are going to engage in a 100-day review of the social assistance system. And that review is due to be completed, and they're due to make an announcement of their intentions on November the 8th. Now, there is absolutely no doubt that the model of welfare reform that Ford is going to implement is going to be brutal. When the Minister, Lisa MacLeod, announced this measure, she said, as right-wingers sometimes like to say, that the best possible social program is a job. Well, not if you're working for a pittance, and not if you're working under conditions of super exploitation. And that's exactly what they want to create. So she made clear that there's going to be a crackdown on so-called welfare fraud. She made clear that they're going to look at how they can dragoon as many disabled people as possible into scrambling for the lowest paid jobs. And the measures that they're going to implement are going to be, I think, even more brutal than the measures that were taken by the last Tory government in the 1990s. That is what we're facing. We're facing a situation where Ford works to create an Ontario where people work in poverty or they face misery and destitution and homelessness. That's really what's at stake here. And the municipal level of government is being dragged along for the ride. So the question comes up to us is what kind of a movement has to be built to stop this? Because there's a war on the poor, but there's a war on all working people. There's a war on public services. It's enormously broad. What kind of a movement needs to be built? And if I can put it that way, a movement that goes from protest to resistance. It isn't adequate just simply to register your objections. Doug Ford doesn't really care if we don't like him. Doug Ford doesn't really care if we're angry. We have to find a way to speak to this government in a language that they will understand. And they understand the language of greed, and they understand the language of power. And we have to unleash the power that we have in order to stop them. We have to confront the Ford government with something more than rhetoric, more than angry words, more than gestures. And he's given us, I think, the key when he uses the term Ontario is open for business. What he means by that is that Ontario will be open for business on the terms of the worst employers. That you will work under wretched conditions, and he will say to everyone everywhere in the business world, come and invest in Ontario because our workers are more exploitable. We have fewer protections, fewer environmental safeguards, fewer consumer protection regulations. All these things are going to be gone. And central to that is creating a social assistance system that is so wretched, so inadequate, so miserable, so uncertain and so precarious that people have the attitude that they must scramble for whatever kind of jobs they can find on the employer's terms. So when that review is announced on November the 8th, we want to respond in a way that points the way forward in terms of that kind of movement of resistance. Next month, we're not going to hold the regular speaking series. We're going to get a bigger location. And we're going to organise a town hall in this community with a great big meal that will be just as delicious as the one we had tonight. And we're going to bring people out and we're going to rally this community. And then that weekend, on November the 17th, we're going to give a down payment on the kind of resistance that needs to be built. Ford is not just a representative of the business community, so-called. Ford himself is a multi-millionaire businessman, and he has a business. And we're going to get buses, and we're going to mobilise, and we're going to go to Deco Labels, his business, and we're going to go there, and we're going to confront him, and we're going to say, we're going to hit you and your friends in the cash registers where you need to be hit. We're going to build a movement that is capable of shutting this province down, of closing it for business. That's really what's at stake. So I urge everyone, we'll have information out in the next few days. We'll start building for it. Tell everyone about this town hall. Tell everyone about mobilising. And tell everyone that we're going to go right to Ford's business and we're going to make it personal. And we're getting in the face of him, Ford, the rich parasite businessman. We're going to stick it to him and we're going to organise a movement in this province that doesn't just content itself with gestures, but a movement that empties the workplaces, fills the streets, brings this government down and defeats their vile agenda. Thank you very much. Okay, we did pretty well in terms of time, and all of the speakers kept well within the limits, which is great, but we still only have 25 minutes. So I don't think we'll do the final there's too many speakers for a final response. What I would say is that if anybody has a specific question that they want to put to a speaker, an individual speaker, we can certainly get an answer back, and we can do that as we go. But I'm going to go around the tables for people, and we are very limited in terms of time now, so I'm going to ask that people keep their remarks to an absolute maximum of 2 minutes, and I will intervene after 2 minutes and say time's up on people. But all those who want to say something. Yes, woman there, and then Barry. Yeah. Yes.
I am a little bit data phobic, so the Metrolinx Presto Pass, what's in it for them is my question. And I'm not saying that needs to be answered, it's just an open question that I have in terminations. I've applied for the pass for the 115. You know, it's 52 in Sudbury and it's 42 in Ottawa. Just saying, I'm going to go with business reasons.
Barry and then Miguel.
Yeah, my name is Barry. I'm with Socialist Action, and 2 minutes will be just fine. I just want to say this. The panelists have presented a rather stark picture of our reality. the cuts to health services, growing authoritarianism, promotion of bigotry and white supremacy, official indifference to illness and overdose prevention, the privatization and dismantling of public assets. We had Hydro One, TTC is on the block. What we need to understand is that these are simply the features of a wretched, rancid, toxic system that stumbles from one crisis to another, and the capitalist rulers aim to make us, working people and the poor, pay for their dysfunctional, nature-destroying system. So if you're clear about that, if you see the big picture, you know that we need campaigns and we need social movements, and the candidates are absolutely right to pose that. But we also need a party that targets capitalist elimination. And that's what we in Socialist Action are trying to build. We host films and conferences, we fight conservative union bureaucrats and sell out NDP politicians. Presently, we're running a candidate in the Toronto City election in Ward 1 in Etobicoke North, right in the heart of fourth country, so-called. But we need a slate of candidates, not just a progressive platform, but a slate of socialist candidates all across the city. And we should make sure that happens in the next 4 years. We have no illusions in bourgeois elections or the state, but we have to raise class consciousness about the need for rebellion against injustice and for a revolution that will bring the majority to power. In closing, if we want to get rid of the capitalist system, please join the TTC riders. Join No It Is Illegal. Join the Ontario Health Coalition and OCAP and the others. But at the same time, we need to build a party that is dedicated to putting Thug Ford and his rotten system into the dustbin of history. It's long overdue. I invite you to join us, and you know what? The revolution will occur sooner than later. Thanks.
Miguel, do you want?
Oh, hi. My question is for Anna. Hello, Anna. I have seen you before speaking at the Toronto Police Services Board, and you give to the board a lot of information to help them shape their policies. I heard with interest tonight that RadTO is proposing cuts of 20% of the Toronto Police Services budget. Explain to me, how are you proposing to make those cuts to happen? Because I really have an interest knowing that the service is 90% of their budgets for salaries and benefits. My second question is for the TTC riders. You know, I am disabled. I have two types of disabilities, and I don't use the TTC because it's unaffordable for me. And I use my bike. And just past September, I received a 1.5 increase in my ODSP check. And what I am bothered is if you're gonna feel any inconvenience that 165 employees of the TTC receive over $101,000 a year. So they're in the sunshine list. So I don't understand how this number of individuals making 10 times the amount of money I make on ODSP encourage me to help you in the interest of reducing the cuts of services for the TTC. Have you noticed all these members that make 666 salaries engage in the participation to reduce the cuts? Because I don't see them coming from Vaughan or from North or Toronto where they live, because they don't live in the city. I tell you why, because I know the police service the employees don't live in the city. Because they live in 3 parking garage houses. So all those things, I wonder if you don't feel any compassion on us by telling your TTC rider, ATU, reduce the salary so the people like us can help you. Because we cannot continue with this bubble of that your salaries are getting up and up and up. So I want to hear information that will help me to hook up with you. Because otherwise those salaries are making me crazy because I only receive 1% increase. Thank you. Help me.
So to your first question, our proposal is that 20% cut to the police budget, which would equal $200 million, The total police budget is about $1 billion right now.
200,000.
No, it'd be 200 million, I think, 20%. And so John Sewell has done a lot of work on this. He has a book called Policing the Real Story. I'm also a member of a group called the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition, tpac.ca. But there are many different things that could be done. Currently, we have the same numbers of police on the streets on all times of day or night. We could be scheduling police much more smartly, so that you have more police at the times when they get more calls for service and fewer when they have less calls for service. We could have 1 police officer per car instead of 2 police officers per car. There's a lot of research that shows that when you have 2 officers per car, it actually increases the number of high-speed chases and risky behavior because they egg each other on. When they're by themselves, they don't take the same kinds of risks. Their current shift change right now, I believe, is somewhere around like a 4-hour overlap. So you've got double time happening over 4 hours over shift changes. You could, anybody who works in social services know you get about 15 minutes, half an hour to do your shift change. So you could reduce that. We also, I think, need to start conversations about looking at the function of police officers much differently. The Ontario Police Act has a very narrow definition of what police officers must do, like the kinds of duties they must do. And then the police services at the different local levels add on a whole bunch of stuff to justify hiring over 5,000 police officers. So the officers in schools, the neighborhood basketball games, the going and visiting schools to do education, all sorts of other kinds of functions that police officers do are not mandated by the Police Act. And we could civilianize a lot of those jobs or just look at those things and decide whether or not they're necessary. Every police officer on average costs about $100,000 for all the benefits and uniforms and the car, et cetera, on average. And we could probably get away in Toronto with having many, many fewer police officers. And that it's quite possible. And we're not suggesting, and we're saying that 200 million should go into under-resourced neighborhoods. That should go to actually really supporting young people who are marginalized and who get so much of the police attention right at the moment. So that's just a start to it, and there's lots more that could be done.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question. I think, my short answer is that we believe that unions are important for protecting really, good jobs that pay us well. And we're working with a union who has a similar interest to us in making sure that our public transit system serves everyone well. And so I would say rather than fighting against each other, we don't want to be...
It appears that it's serving a minority, exclusive privileged minority of workers,
Management.
but versus the rest of the people.
Management.
We have an opioid crisis, we have homeless on the street, and these people live the rich life outside the Toronto area.
Right, okay, I understand. So you're not talking about the TTC workers, but the management.
Management, upper management, union, et cetera, yes.
Right, yeah. So I don't have a particular answer for you about that. I agree that the management shouldn't be getting paid that much. And we're working with TTC workers. We're working with the workers.
But those workers are in the sunshine list.
Okay, we gotta go on.
Come on.
Miguel, come on now. There's a lot of people. We got 13 minutes. That's the reality. Although just to say that OCAP is not anti-union. OCAP supports trade unions. Sometimes we have a lot of issues with trade union leaders who go in the wrong direction. We are anti-cop. We're very like-minded there. And our goal is to ensure that everybody gets decent wages. We don't want to bring down better paid workers to a lower level. We want to bring all working people up to a decent level. So we have some other questions. One at the back, I see a hand waving right at the back, but no face. Yes, there it is. Yeah, at the back. Yeah.
I wanted to address the
any more. Yes, back there.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Marco, and this is from Mr. Godoy. I'm equally passionate about the issues of safe sites, known as legal, etc. So, but I can't diffuse the effort I want to put in, so I understand that the big quick spark, we more or less can coalesce so that we don't diffuse our energies in this different, although it's under the same system we're fighting against.
The rally at Queen's Park is an action, and I qualify that by saying a rally might not necessarily be a radical action, but it's a start. I totally embrace the comments being made here in terms of fighting together and probably transcending our own silos and building a movement for all the people, you know what I mean? But let's not ignore what's happening in healthcare. $358 million were cut for mental health programs. Our HIT Plus that cover youth under 25 was eliminated. And in order to cut $22 billion, we'll have to privatize. And there is the blueprint already of how to amalgamate 150 hospitals across Ontario and make them 40, 50 mega hospital P3s, of course, with private capital, and eliminate that. To give you an example, in Windsor, there used to be 4 hospitals. Now there are 2. Now they are planning to create a mega hospital 75 kilometers away from downtown, eliminating totally the concept of community hospital. A taxi drive will cost $75. So it's atrocious what's going on, not only in healthcare. The presentation that we hear about the threat to our public transit is huge. You know what I mean? And a lot of public assets are on the line. We don't have excuses not to come together, not to put the people's agenda and build it and fight for it together. All of us. Thank you for the question.
Any final speakers? Judy, and then.
Under Harris, there were days of action, which started off very well, but then were canceled after a few of them happened. But they were canceled by the bureaucracy because they were too effective. And so Harris got a second term as a result because there was no real movement against him. So that we have to keep in mind when we're thinking of what to do now.
Thank you, Judy. And at the back?
Yeah, I would just like to say that I would like to thank those speakers who came out tonight. Thank you very much for coming out. You spoke very, very well. And you touched issues and topics that are of concern. And that the people need to fight for. The government needs to know. So, on that note, I want to thank you.
Yes.
You mentioned OW and ODSP, so we all know a little bit about that, but one of the things that maybe you don't know, because it's a group that never has a spokesman, is people like Jordan here. And that also hits the hospital and the health care and so on. But I don't know if you know, when you talk about austerity and the cuts and so on, nobody has talked about this because nobody knows what's going on. And so I'm interested in November 8th and hearing this report. Those people who are getting direct funding, the developmentally handicapped, physically handicapped, and neurologically handicapped, and so on. Some people haven't had any money since April. They've had to drop out of their programs, all sorts of things like that. Now, it's true, some caregivers can afford that and so on. If you're an old age pensioner and you're a caregiver, you can't afford it. And so that person then loses all life, all their recreation, everything, their programs, their day programs and so on. And nobody, you can't even get an answer on a telephone. Today, one of the MPPs told me that one of his things is that they're taking the phones out of the government offices, yes. That they're, the workers are all going to be using cell phones as a supposed cost-saving thing. What it really does is puts them that much further from the public and so on. So we couldn't get through to them since April. And with the cell phone, you know, it's like you just don't even exist. The other thing I wanted to mention is when people are talking about the bed blockers and so on, and John, you live in the East End, don't you? Recently, when I was hospitalized and they put me in a geriatrics ward, I realized I was the genius of the ward because everybody there had dementia and didn't belong there in the first place. And then I asked the young doctor, who I know I think I've got underwear older than him. And I said to him, is it true the rumors that I hear about this hospital? And he said, what's that? I said, you've got a whole floor here that nobody knows about? And he said, that's right. They're permanently there because there is no supportive housing. And you know, if we bitch and complain here in Toronto, but look at the rural areas. The areas where those people have to fly from, I don't know, Cochrane to Ottawa to get their teeth fixed, and those kinds of things. So we really need to look at the whole health system. I'm very interested in the 23rd.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's very valuable. Any final question or comment before we go? Then I think we'll wrap up. And just to thank all of the speakers for the wonderful contributions, to thank everybody for coming out. And the last comment really drives home the fact that if we're going to fight against this austerity agenda and its commander-in-chief, Dirty Doug Ford, Dirty Doug Ford, what we're going to have to do, I think, is we're going to have to build a movement that doesn't leave anybody behind. A movement, you know, where we are defending the gains of better paid unionised workers, but we're not letting them close down. We're not letting them close down facilities that save people's lives. We're not going to let them abandon people. We're not going to leave people sitting warehoused. We're going to actually build a movement that represents everybody. And our contribution to that is going to be next month. When the literature gets out, I hope that people will spread it in the community. I hope people will make the town hall, we'll get a big place, and I hope the walls are bulging out. And I hope people get on the buses and come out to Doug Ford's business. At the back of that business, we went out there and took a look at it. When you drive around the back, it's so close to his political life that it has a whole enclosed area full of Doug Ford for Mayor signs that they've still got lying there. It's his personal cash register, and we're going to go and stick it to him, and he will react, and he will be pissed off, and it will look good on him. And if you want to stick it to Doug Ford, if you want to stick it to his agenda, be part of this, join it, and be part of the fight back, because we're not going through the motions. We intend to defeat this government. Thanks very much.